I find that funny because in the activities that the Leap Manifesto wants to go forward with, including renewables and things like that, they're so dependent on that resource extraction for the building solar panels and all these other things. Like, you can't do one without the other. So for her to support that, it's a bit of a kick for us here in the community, especially given, her home community of the city of Thompson is heavily dependent on the nickel mine that exists here. One of the biggest nickel mines in Canada, and at one point produced some of the best nickel in the world. We need to be proud of that.
Jeff Fountain is a city councillor in the small city of Thompson, Manitoba, and on Friday, February 4th, he publicly called for the resignation of his local NDP MP, Niki Ashton. Now, you'll recall Niki Ashton most recently went to Greece twice this year, while at the same time calling for stricter lockdowns and stricter enforcement of lockdown rule breakers here in Canada. Niki Ashton didn't technically break the law, but she definitely broke the spirit of the law, and she was, obviously a shameless hypocrite about it all. Ashton has also called for the release of Huawei CFO Meng Wanzhou. You'll recall she was arrested at the Vancouver airport on behalf of the Americans for fraud and violating American sanctions against doing business with Iran. Now, Ashton has also sponsored a parliamentary petition asking that Huawei be allowed to participate in the ongoing construction of Canada's 5G network. She's on the wrong side of everything. This was all too much for Jeff Fountain, and he wants Ashton to resign as his MP. Now, it's not all that often you see a municipal politician calling on the local MP to resign, but in my discussions with Fountain, he feels as though his community deserves better. So I interviewed Fountain about Ashton late last week. Check it out. Jeff, I want to thank you for joining me. I want to ask you, what prompted your call to have Niki Ashton resign? It's not every day where a local politician demands the resignation of the local MP. Tell us how that came to be.
First of all, thank you so much, Sheila, for taking an interest in my writing. It's a writing that easily gets overlooked, so I very much appreciate the attention that Rebel News is paying to the writing today. Certainly, when you say demanding, that's kind of funny because it's coming from a municipal politician. It's probably not going to go very far, but it is a symbolic gesture on my part that at least some of her constituents are not happy with what she's done in the past few years. And it's not one thing; it's a broad range of things that we've watched her do, and the performance that she's put out there for everyone to see the last few years. Much of it has garnered some national attention, much more so than I would say is garnered in our own local communities in the riding. But if I was to go through that list of things, we've got everything from the guns issue, the long gun registry issue, in which she flip-flopped a few times, despite this riding being probably one of the most gun-dependent ridings in all of Canada. So that was a bit of an issue. And tied to that, we've also had the issue with the recent vote where I think it was Bob Soroya had called for a motion putting action to criminal activity and the import and export of illegal weapons into Canada, which she voted against, which those two things are related to me. That's a problem because we continue to demonize long gun owners, and at the same time, when the opportunity is there to put some effort and action into dealing with illegal gun activity and trade, the political will wasn't there on her part, as well as many others. So that was a big issue, at least for me. One of the bigger issues as well is the Leap Manifesto. Her support for that is a real problem. given that our riding is extremely dependent upon mining, forestry, hydroelectric development, and other resource extraction. The LEAP manifesto is clear in that it doesn't support, I think the exact words are, damaging extraction activities or damaging resource extraction activities, which mining is. I find that funny because in the activities that the LEAP manifesto wants to go forward with, including renewables and things like that, they're so dependent on that resource extraction for the building solar panels and all these other things. Like, you can't do one without the other. So for her to support that, it's a bit of a kick for us here in the community, especially given her home community of the city of Thompson is heavily dependent on the nickel mine that exists here. One of the biggest nickel mines in Canada, and at one point produced some of the best nickel in the world. We need to be proud of that heritage, and certainly there's clearly a need for nickel in the future for those renewables and electric vehicles production. And we've seen some activity and talk with Tesla and things like that. So you can't have a leap forward into those renewables without mining and extraction of material. So that's certainly disappointing for my riding, for many people that rely on that. Above and beyond that, we've got COVID travel. It's been the tendency recently, and I think many of your watchers and viewers have seen, where we've had people, politicians and leaders not doing what they've advised other people to do. So, it may not be a law-breaking thing, but it's when you're telling people to stay sheltered in place and isolate, and then you yourself have gone, in her case, to Greece over the Christmas holidays. It's certainly, especially with people that I'm responsible for representing, certainly very difficult for them to take, especially one of those who've lost family members when she's clearly gone to Greece. Was for a family member, a grandmother that was sick. Meanwhile, we've got regular people here whose parents are dying or in tough situations or have died, and are not able to see them. So it's certainly hard on that end. And I realize that I've gone a bit long here, but
nope.
The final straw for me was the relationship with China with her. As you know, recently, I think it was November 18th, we had a vote, a non-binding motion in the House of Commons, where there was some discussion about Huawei, the future of Huawei in Canada, the 5G network, as well as a condemnation of Chinese aggression, which is clearly documented. We've got the 9-dot line, issues with the Uyghur people, crackdown in Hong Kong, issues on the border with China, lots of border disputes actually with China, and really an aggressive foreign policy on China's part, which includes espionage that CSIS has brought to our attention recently. And most recently, I think was picked up by your network, was and may have come from Global TV to start out with, the issue where China's now screening all the visas for people coming into Canada, which I think these are all issues that you can't possibly serve, in my opinion, as a member of Parliament, and not take that to heart. And all of these things combined together have led me to call for her resignation. That's a personal call I've made, not something that council's asked for. But I feel strongly, having had quite a bit of input and given a lot of thought to this, that if, at least if it's symbolic in that she probably won't resign, that she may give some thought to the direction that she's looking at going here.
Well, I appreciate that someone is trying to represent the views and viewpoints of the people in Thompson. And if it's not Niki Ashton, and it doesn't seem to be that way, that I'm glad that it's you. Now, what has been the reception from your colleagues on council? And then secondarily, but however, most importantly, the residents and the people that you represent in Thompson?
Yeah, it's a good question. As you know, and your network is well aware, we are in a time where people coming from the right side of the political spectrum are being canceled, and certainly there's a significant amount of risk in speaking politically on political issues, especially given that this riding is a very much orange riding, an NDP-held riding. And I've seen it before with other people, that speaking out on these issues and representing maybe a minority in the riding has its risks. So I'm well aware going into this that I'm taking quite a risk at bringing this forward. That said, my community has many people that were significantly upset with the long gun registry flip-flopping on her part. I should make it clear that in the end she did have to vote for it, but she waited till the last minute to see if that, if it was going to pass or fail, or if she was needed or not to do that. And on the COVID travel, certainly, definitely a lot of anger, especially, and rightly so, given that many people were denied access to their loved ones, and she certainly took advantage of her position and ability to go overseas to see her ailing grandmother. So there is that balance in the community. So I'm hoping to at least speak to the minority. I think it's the minority of people that sit on that right side of the political spectrum with respect to this, and realistically, for anybody that followed the rules while our politicians didn't. I hope I speak to them for them as well.
Yeah, with Ashton, I mean, I'm not against travel. I'm not. I want everybody to be able to travel. The problem with Ashton is that she was one of the more extreme locker-downers. She was calling for stricter penalties and harder lockdowns. Who knows? While she was probably even in Greece at the time that she was calling for those things. Can
I comment on that a little bit?
Please.
Yeah, and we spoke to how important resource extraction is and some of the projects that are going on up here. And we recently had her speaking at one of these developments, calling for the development to be halted due to the risk from COVID, shortly before she left for Greece. So there's that double-handed double speak where, we're worried about COVID coming into our communities. We don't want to take the risk. We have a high-risk population. I'm not arguing against that. It's a high-risk population for sure. But, for her to then, of her own accord, go off overseas, which, may not have been illegal, but was certainly advised against, and I would say probably not in the best interest of the community, given that there's a risk there as well. Hypocrisy was pretty thick on that.
Now, has she responded to you at all? Or is she just pretending like the community isn't outraged at her?
I did reach out to Miss Ashton to see. I had specific questions. I wanted to find out what was behind her support for Meng Wanzhou and the failure to vote against the motion on November 18th. I haven't heard a response back from her, but I'm certainly open to hearing back from her. And if she wants to indicate what the reasons were for those activities or her actions in those regards, I'd be willing to share that with the people that I represent. But I haven't heard anything, and certainly with the amount of scrutiny that she's come under for traveling earlier on in the year, I don't expect to, and I don't expect her to resign either, although I'm calling for it. I hope, though, she'll take away something from that, and that will benefit my community.
Now, finally, before I let you go, because you've been so generous with your time, I wanted to ask you your opinion on the lockdown in Manitoba. In my opinion, Manitoba has been one of the more authoritarian lockdown jurisdictions. I think Quebec, Ontario, and Manitoba, the majority of our fightthefines.com cases have come from there. I guess, what is your opinion of Conservative Premier Brian Pallister's, my words, not yours, heavy-handed approach to the COVID lockdown?
Well, there's certainly, some element of the public that has a high level of fear, and that a Conservative government would play into that and have a lockdown with enforcement to this extent surprises me a little bit. Certainly, scares me a little bit, that we're willing to go to these lengths with enforcement. And in my opinion, just my opinion, I'm not a medical professional, but I don't feel that they're effective. We have one set of rules that may contradict other sets of rules, and we're allowed to go to Walmart, but people aren't allowed to go to church and things like that. And I really feel it's the consistency is not there per se, and then the consistency of enforcement certainly isn't there. This is something that we're grappling with in our community. We have very high numbers, and maybe I'll just leave it at this. We desperately want to overcome this because it's had such a devastating impact on our local economy, and we've certainly noticed that it's a national issue. This region, more than most others, probably more than almost all of them, is affected by COVID. It's the numbers are through the roof, but I don't think we're going to get anywhere with heavy-handed tactics for some and not so heavy-handed tactics for others. And I'll bring it right back to my mention of Niki Ashton. We've got this heavy-handed approach for the little guy who can't necessarily defend himself, but for our politicians, it's fine for them to, not follow orders. And I do appreciate now finally starting to see some repercussions for politicians who haven't followed those health orders. So I'm hopeful we'll get over this soon. And I'm praying for everybody to do that as soon as possible and get back to some element of normal.
Ashton has been accused by Conservative MPs of supporting Chinese communist propaganda over Canadian values of freedom, democracy, and the rule of law, and I would share that opinion myself. So I'm happy to be able to amplify the voices of municipal politicians who just want better for their communities than people like Ashton. I think the people of Thompson are well served by Jeff Fountain, even if they aren't well served by Niki Ashton. For Rebel News, I'm Sheila Gunn Reid. Did you know that Rebel News has hired a top human rights lawyer to take the case of the two Michaels? That's Michael Spavor and Michael Kovrig. They were kidnapped by China in response to the arrest of Meng Wanzhou, all the way to the United Nations. Now, if you'd like to see our complaint to the United Nations and support our legal efforts to raise the profile of these two kidnapped Canadian men, please go to freethetwomichaels.com.